Hey, my name is Steve Diest, and this is...
I'm Christine Van Diest.
So we do know how long we've been married. We were married just recently.
31 years ago.
31 years ago. We joke, and it's oftentimes serious, that we're on our third marriage. And it's part of our story. We were young missionaries. We met in Brazil, and we dated long distance and got married right after college and went directly into ministry. And about 13 years later, we're heading off to our third international stop, and we are going to go change the world for Jesus in Mexico City. We brought 3 young kids and found out we were pregnant with our 4th. While there. And so we were out performing all over the world in ministry, in Spain, in Chile, and now in Mexico City. Yet God had different plans. It was a pretty clear calling to go there. Yet the day after Thanksgiving, after an argument,
I was done. I was ready to leave and walk away from this marriage. And I think it was the perfect storm of a lot of, I would say, unmet expectations, lack of communication. We were performing for the ministry, for the Lord, I think at that time, and we were performing for each other. But we were just disconnected. And I think very lost, very lonely, and I was tapping out. And so we came back to the States to...
That was an easy way of her saying, I don't love you anymore, and I'm leaving you. That was on Friday.
Yeah, it was really painful.
Tuesday, we leave Mexico City with our kids. It was a long-term move. We leave all of our stuff, and we find ourselves back in the States, and we find ourselves going through intensive counseling here in Colorado.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of marriage, too. Really hard year. Your mom died. We had the birth of our 4th child. But we began to see God move in a new way, and he was poking at for me personally, and I'm not going to speak to Christine, but for me personally, there's a lot of insecurities, a lot of performance, a lot of wounds surrounding, am I loved? Does she love me? Does God love me? And yet in that process, you were going through your own stuff that year as well.
Mm-hmm, sure. I feel like I grew up not having a voice. I have an identical twin sister. I'm more on the quieter side. I think Steve has a big personality, and so I had to break up with not really being myself. And I think that's where I really discovered where am I at? Like, what's my identity in? And am I trying to please him? Am I trying to please the Lord? What was going on? So I think for me, find my voice, realize that he will never meet all my needs. I will never meet all his needs. And it was this oneness with the Lord that we both were recognizing we desperately needed, we had gotten away from.
Yes, recognizing, but not at the level yet at this point, at year 13, 14. I still remember going through all this counseling, 40, 50, 60 hours of counseling in a very short period, being like the Verizon commercial. And I still had this neediness. I still needed Christine to prop me up. We had changed our whole life trajectory of ministry and our job, and I was like, do you love me now? Do you love me now? It's like I was checking in to make sure that she could prop me up and say, you're okay. Mm-hmm. And I remember in March of 2007, just hitting the end of my rope. And, but I remember her saying in that process as well through counseling, going, I'm not going to choose to love you just because it's the right thing to do. You wanted it to come from a deeper, like an agape God love.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, we came back in December. We jumped into 2 weeks of intensive counseling. I think my prayer every day was, Lord, help me love him with that deep love when we first met. And that was my simple prayer. God, help me love Steve. And I think I prayed that every day for almost 6 months. And the hard thing was, at this point, we were so raw and real, we weren't going to fake it. And every day that he would ask me, do you love me? I would say, I love you. I'm not leaving you, but I don't love you in the way that I know that you want me to say I love you. And so it was very raw and real. And I remember probably in June, so 6 months later, that it might have been a sermon I heard, but it was the Holy Spirit just really like refreshing my soul again, in the sense that I remember saying out loud, I love him. I love him like I want to love him, and like he wants me to love him. And it was real.
And I think if I'm honest, I think she probably grew in her wholeness a lot more that year than I did. I think I was still putting so much of my identity in, we're married and we're going to go make a difference. Yeah. And yes, careers changed and ministry changed. Because I was like early on in that intensive counseling, I looked at my counselor and said, sitting just like this, I remember I was on the right side and said, "Can you fix her?" And I said that to her and to him. And so I think when I saw her changing and that we were becoming married again, I thought, okay, we're whole. And then it was another 8 years later, I began to see some patterns and issues surface again. And this time I realized I can't work on marriage. It's not about a marriage oneness. It was, I had to get healthy. I had to go deep to go, am I loved? And am I whole? And so I dipped myself into counseling, and that was the beginning of me really becoming solid. And I wanted Christine. I still remember having a conversation in 2015 saying, I want to be married to you, but I don't need you anymore. And that took me about 2 years in counseling to process with my counselor to let her go. Because I used to say things like, well, she signed a marriage certificate. We're going to be one forever. And my brain just didn't register on intimacy and love and acceptance. And when I told her, I remember saying, this is what God's calling me to be as a husband, as a father, as a leader. I want to be married to you, but I don't need you. I really thought you were going to say peace out.
Yeah. I think for me, I needed, I think this was the freedom, when I think about freedom of choice to love someone unconditionally, I think it set me free to say, yes, I do want you. And I don't feel caught, and I don't feel, I don't know, like...
It's almost like you didn't have to take care of a mid-40-year-old
I think
man.
it was like, I no longer am in charge of changing you, who you are. I'm only responsible for changing me. I cannot change you. And I had some work to do. Because I think when our marriage collapsed in Mexico City, there was a lot of spiritual warfare. It was a perfect storm.
Yeah.
I think the enemy, like we talked about, does not know everything, but is pretty clever and knows what our weaknesses are, our wounds. There is warfare, there is wickedness. And I think for me, there was some counterfeit affections that I was clinging to that were not healthy, not right, that I think even for me, 8 years later, I had to sever them completely. And that was the change that I got to step into a new marriage that we say marriage 3 and say, yes, I choose the Lord fully and I choose you.
Yeah, and for me, it was the deep sense of, I'm a son of the King. He loves me. And things may be rocky with us. She may not like me that day, or maybe I make a sexual advance and she says no, but I'm not having a tantrum like a 2-year-old because I'm okay. And now when there's a choice and there's conflict, it's not, are we doing okay? I just have to make sure, am I doing okay? Am I whole with the Lord? I still can choose to serve you and nurture you, but I'm not doing it in a codependent way. And I think a lot of that insecurity, yes, you can be all this bravado and all this leader and changing the world in business and ministry. And oftentimes there's a wound deep in my soul that I'm just not good enough. And now I realize, yeah, I'm good enough because of not what Christine tells me and not how my kids even respond to me or others, but I'm good enough because the Lord is working in me. He's changing me. He's changing me from the inside out, and He's making me alive. And now I can, from that place, go, ooh, I can love you. I can initiate you with you. It's less risky because it's not about me getting propped up. It's just about me going, yeah, I want to be with you. I want to spend time with you. I want to love you. And at other times I'm like, nope, I don't want to. And that's not a fear of, we're going to collapse and go into marriage 4.
I think there is no longer fear. There is no longer performing for each other. I would say in our marriage now, there is such a sweet sense of wholeness with the Lord, that He's our source. And out of that, there's an overflow of just being kind to Him, loving Him, not being, what's the word? Like I'm offended when He does something that, I don't know, bugs me. I'm more whole than I've ever been. So it just kind of like, it doesn't bug me. It's His issue, His deal, and He has to go with the Lord, and vice versa. So I think it's just, there's freedom to really love wholly and unconditionally, and there's not a scorecard. And I love that. I feel like there's not a scorecard anymore on how we treat each other.
And I remember my counselor going, I said, yeah, I want to be married and have this and this and this. And it's a contract she signed. And he goes, yeah, that's not love. And I didn't have a vision for it, but I said, I can trust you, but I'm not sure I can trust myself and what I'm experiencing. But now in hindsight, almost 8, 9, 10 years later after that end of marriage too, I can say, gosh, this is an experience and a love and a relationship like none other. You're my best friend. You're my lover. You're my wife. Yet I know, like couples that probably are watching this tonight, you may be in one of these situations going, we're not there, or we're struggling, or we can sense some things. And that's why we want to share our story. Hopefully you can relate and be encouraged. And then we'll send you guys back into some conversations to further the dialogue, who you are and where you stand as a marriage, and then how God's working in you.
And I think in final thoughts, I would like to say that there is never a marriage too far gone. And I think twice we would have said, this is the end, it's over. And to see a marriage where our counselor gave us these words, it's like you've been given a gift, but this gift of a new marriage is wrapped in thorns. And to open this gift, you're going to bleed. So we did a lot of bleeding, and thankfully we didn't bleed out. We didn't completely die, but we really came to the bottom and then have seen a redeemed marriage. So I just offer that hope in Christ to you that there's no marriage too far gone, that God redeems. And so we look forward to being a resource, but also just love on you guys and blessing you in your marriages and just heading back into some conversations.